Sandra was staring at an IRS notice when she called me. $11,000 in original tax and now $18,700 on the bill. The difference wasn't more tax, it was penalties. More than half of what the IRS said she owed had been added on top of what she actually owed. IRS penalty abatement is the formal IRS program that removes those penalties. And here's what's almost nobody knows. The IRS will not tell you it exists if you don't ask. It's not advertised. It's not mentioned in collection notices. The agents on the phone don't bring it up, but the program is real. It's official, and a significant portion of people who receive penalty notices qualify for it. Sandra qualified. She didn't find out until she called my office. We're going to cover both routes. First-time penalty abatement, which can remove penalties entirely without a hardship explanation, and reasonable cause relief, which applies when life generally got in the way. We also cover the single most common mistake that kills an otherwise valid request. Most people make it without realizing it. Details change to protect privacy. But Sandra's situation is one I see regularly. The IRS imposes a failure to file penalty of 5% of the unpaid tax for every month or partial month a return is late, up to a maximum of 25%. On top of that, there's a separate failure to pay penalty of 0.5% per month on any balance that remains unpaid after the due date. Both of those penalties run simultaneously on top of interest that compounds daily on the outstanding balance. Run that math for 18 months on a $10,000 tax bill, and you're looking at a balance that has grown by 40% or more. None of it is the original tax you owed. Penalties and interest are often the largest single component of what people owe the IRS. They're also under the right circumstances, the most removable part. IRS penalty abatement is the mechanism that exists to reduce or eliminate those penalties. The IRS officially recognizes 3 forms of penalty relief: first-time penalty abatement, reasonable cause relief, and statutory exception. Statutory exception is narrow. It applies when a taxpayer relies on written IRS guidance that later turned out to be incorrect. It comes up occasionally, but it's not the primary path for most people. The 2 routes that matter for the majority of cases are first-time penalty abatement and reasonable cause. Let's go through both in detail. First-time penalty abatement is the faster of the 2 routes. And for people who can qualify, it can remove penalties entirely without requiring any explanation of why the problem happened. The IRS will consider your request under this program if 3 conditions are met. First, you've filed all required tax returns, or you've filed valid extensions. Second, you've paid the tax due, or you have an arrangement in place to pay it. Third, you have a clean penalty history, meaning no significant penalties assessed in the 3 tax years before the year you're requesting abatement for. That third condition is the gate. If you had a penalty in the 3-year window, even a minor one, first-time penalty abatement is off the table for that year. But if your history is clean, and that is generally a first occurrence, the IRS has a process for granting the abatement based on that history alone. You don't need a hardship story. You don't need documentation of a life event. You need a clean record and a properly submitted request. In practice, first-time abatement can be requested by phone, in writing, or through a formal abatement letter. The phone route is tempting, but if an IRS agent denies the request on the call without documentation in hand, your appeals path gets harder. A written request requires a clean record and a clear starting point if you need to appeal. FTPA denials are often reversed on appeal. Reasonable cause relief is the second path, and it offers a wider range of situations. But the IRS applies a specific standard. You have to demonstrate that you exercise ordinary business care and prudence in meeting your tax obligations. But despite that effort, you were still unable to comply. What the IRS accepts under this standard, a serious illness or hospitalization that prevented you from filing or paying, the death of a family member, a natural disaster, fire, or flood that destroyed your records, reliance on incorrect advice from a qualified tax professional. If you can document it, and incarceration in some circumstances, what the IRS generally does not accept, I forgot, financial hardship alone typically doesn't meet the standard, and neither does job loss alone. The IRS draws a distinction between not having the money to pay, which is addressed through payment plans and other resolution tools, and being genuinely unable to comply due to circumstances outside your control. Conflating them in your request is a fast path to a denial. Documentation is what separates an approved reasonable cause request from a denied one. Vague claims get denied automatically. The IRS wants specifics. If you are hospitalized, medical records showing dates of treatment, death in the family, with documentation of the loss and its impact. Keep in mind, the request needs to tell a clear chronological story of what happened, when and how it prevented compliance. Anything that reads like a generic claim without supporting evidence goes in the denial pile. Let me pause here. Drop your experience in the comments if you've ever tried to request IRS penalty abatement on your own. I'm specifically curious how many people called in and heard the word denied from the first agent they reached and accepted that as final, because that is the most common and most costly mistake I see in this area. Here's what actually goes wrong most often. Someone gets the notice, sees the penalty balance, calls the IRS, explains their situation without documentation in hand, and hears no. They hang up. They think it's over. They pay the full amount. What they didn't know is that a phone denial is not a final determination. You have appeal rights. The collection appeals program exists. The Office of Appeal exists for you. An agent's verbal no is not the end of the road, but the overwhelming majority of people treat it that way. A well-documented written request or a properly filed appeal regularly produces a different result. I've seen requests reversed on appeal that look like dead ends on the phone. The IRS isn't always right on first contact. The second mistake is treating penalty abatement as the whole solution. Penalties can represent a large portion of what someone owes, and removing them changes the math significantly. But the underlying tax balance and any remaining interest still exists after abatement. If you're left with a balance you can't fully pay after penalties come off, you need a next step, an installment agreement, an offer in compromise, currently non-collectible status. We've covered the full menu of IRS resolution tools in our video on the Fresh Start program. And it's worth watching after this one to see the complete picture. If your penalty balance is significant, and I'd use $5,000 as a rough threshold for where the complexity starts to justify representation. Having an attorney involved changes the dynamics. I can document the request properly, submit it through the right channels, and if the IRS denies it, file an appeal and argue it directly. I've had reasonable cause requests reversed on appeal that look like dead ends on first contact. That's what knowing the appeals process actually looks like versus what a caller hears from a general IRS line. IRS penalties are often the largest part of what people owe and the most removable part if you know how to ask. In the Fresh Start program video, I cover all the resolution tools in one place, including some penalty relief components built into the program itself. Watch that next. Link is in the description. If you're dealing with a penalty balance right now and you want someone to look at your specific situation, call us at 253-383-0140 or visit Sterbick.com, Sterbick Law, right here in Tacoma. And in the comments, have you ever tried to get IRS penalties removed on your own? Let us know. Tell me what happened. I read every one of them.